Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Bryant, the Southwest Florida Business Development Manager for Castle Group. Shauna Fleischbein and I are here with Deanna from Berg Simpson to give, and we're excited. Shauna and I actually spoke beforehand, and we're super excited about this topic today. So thank you, Deanna and Shauna, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Deanna.
So my name is Shauna Fleischbein, and I cover the kind of Sarasota, Tampa territory for Castle Group for business development. And I'm joined, as we said, with Laura, who covers everything south of me on the West Coast. And like Laura said, we're really excited. Laura and I both have operations backgrounds and have managed communities ourselves. And we know how tricky the board dynamic can be at times. You're really lucky if you have a fantastic board who works well together. So we're really excited to have Deanna here and for her to share this presentation with us on how to create boards that work. So I'm going to hand it over to Deanna, let her introduce herself, and then we'll let her take over the screen share as well.
Okay, well, hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Shauna and Laura, for having me. It's always a pleasure meeting folks at Castle Group. I mean, I think it's no secret that everybody keeps posting and bragging about working for Castle. I'm like, you guys must have an incredible internal energy, because I have met a lot of property managers and a lot of property management companies, and not everybody seems to be, drinking the great Kool-Aid of their company. So I don't know what you guys do, if you guys like serve everyone caviar every time you get together or what, but I always get excited to speak for you, because everybody's always smiling and happy to be where they are. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share what I get excited about. And so, yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Deanna Sada. I am one of the shareholders at Berg Simpson Law Firm. Our firm is in multiple states, and if you Google it, you'll learn that we do a lot of different areas of law, but in Florida, we only do construction defect litigation. And it's probably because there's a lot of that out there, and we don't exactly have the time or the energy or the desire to do anything else. So with that, what we naturally end up learning is working with board members, property managers, and homeowners alike. And we learn that in the hardest ways possible, because as you all may appreciate, going through a construction defect case in a community is not easy. And so what that means is I have had to stand and sit in front of very unhappy board members. And so we end up learning ways to bring board members around in a very difficult context. And so for that reason, as some of you know, I love teaching. I do teach at the local law school here at Stetson Law, and I've been teaching ever since I became an attorney. And so I always think of new things to teach. And this came to my mind to start teaching about not just what construction defect litigation looks like, which all of you can talk to me after if you have questions, but about things that I have learned as an attorney that is leading a very hard case. And one of those things happens to be creating boards that work. So I just wanted to not just introduce myself, but give a little preface about why I'm even able to talk about a topic like this. I'm not a psychologist by any means, even though that was my background before. But I do think learning in the trenches by working with board members in one of the hardest things a community can possibly go through, which is a construction defect litigation, allows me to gain a very unique perspective in speaking about boards and creating ones that work. So if I do have the remote ability already by one of you fine ladies, I'll go ahead and share my screen and get going.
Yes, you should have ability.
Okay. So as much as I hate to look away from the camera, it is significantly easier for me to put the slide on the other screen. And so for that reason, you might see me looking away. Please forgive me for that, but it really is just looking at the presentation. All right, so oh. All right, so does everybody, what are you guys seeing right now? Are you guys seeing the presentation?
Yep. And
We
now you're on
are. Yep, there
presentation
you
mode.
go.
All right,
Now
there
it's
we
in
go.
presentation mode.
Okay, perfect. So where I'll start is, you know, I always make this comment in the very beginning of this course, and it ends up generating a little bit of pushback in the end, but I'll still continue to do it because I genuinely believe that that's true. Boards, contrary to popular belief, presumptively don't work. They don't work. I've actually had board members give me dirty looks in the beginning of this when I say that, but I then explain it and it makes sense. So before I even jump into the first slide, which really asks why do boards not work, I want to explain what I mean by boards presumptively don't work. For those of you here who have hiring and firing authority, perhaps you were the CEO of a company or, you know, HR, whatever it may be. When you interview people to work at your company, you're probably interviewing them for skills, right? Qualifications, and these types of basic things that we all know, you know? But one of the things you're also interviewing them for is, do they fit with your team, right? Like if you are interviewing someone and they just happen to be this like, you know, negative person who's always disgruntled and whining and is angry about the fact that they have to have a job, and the rest of your team is like bubbly and excited and fun, you may not hire that person even if they're qualified, correct? That's because when you have hiring and firing authority at a company, the reason why the team presumptively works, but then there might be issues down the road, is because you get to vet people. You get to pick and choose, and you get to determine if, does this person fit the team? But as we all know here, I'm sure we have a lot of CAMs here who have experienced that sometimes when you open up board elections, you may not have enough people even running, right? So the criteria becomes, if you have a pulse, you can make the board. Well, if that's the criteria and you don't have the luxury of vetting and making sure your board has good synergy together, or that the qualifications are symbiotic, one person is a numbers person, the other person is a creative person, you don't have the luxury of picking and choosing, then you're going to get people on your board that may be from all different walks of life, right? You might have the millennial who wants to text the meeting minutes to the person who is, a retired CEO of a company that went public on that same board. And they may clash presumptively because unlike companies, unlike businesses, unlike situations and scenarios where we have the luxury of vetting, we don't get to do that in an association board. People run, and a lot of times there's politics, right? There's like this clique and that clique, and then this clique gets a secretary on the board, and this clique gets a president on the board. So you may have not just age differences or generational differences or technological ability differences, but you may have people that are enemies in the politics of the building that are both on the board. And all of a sudden you tell them, hey guys, you are now the board members who get to make the decisions in like a 250 unit or community. And you have to make sure that you are upholding your fiduciary duty to protect the best interest of the association, even if it means making hard decisions like a special assessment that may make your neighbor pay $3,000 extra and they may not invite you to wine anymore. You now have to volunteer your time and get paid zero money for it, but also go and probably grow several more gray hairs by the time your tenure is over. And you have to do a very good job at it. Like, it's hard. It's a very hard position to have. So I start by saying, guys, they presumptively don't work. So how do we make them work? Is we have to recognize the harsh reality that they presumptively don't work. And so when we recognize that reality, we don't approach it with the mentality of, hey, there's nothing wrong here today, so let's just get our business done and move on. We approach it knowing there's a problem here, even if it doesn't appear that way, and let's be proactive about fixing it. And we start implementing systems that make this board, that come from different walks of life, that may have different agendas and different reasons for being on the board. We start implementing systems that really bring them in harmony together. And we have to be proactive about doing that. So why don't they work? A lot of times they're not on the same page. A lot of times they don't understand their roles. And yeah, I put don't get fed there. I apologize for the date here. This is my issue. Definitely ignore that. I put don't get fed there because believe it or not, I have found that communities who are willing to share a meal with each other, any opportunity they get, actually studies show that people who share meals together end up liking each other more just naturally, only because eating is actually a relatively intimate thing to do in front of people. And when you can figure out perhaps an open board meeting where you make it like a potluck situation, or you just order sandwiches or whatever, and then you can share a meal together every once in a while, people tend to be a lot more sympathetic with each other. They put their guards down a lot, and they are less likely to be combative and argumentative. There are a lot of studies about this. This is actually one thing I like about my psychology background, is I tend to implement some of these tricks even in my own team. Whether they like it or not, my paralegals and my lawyers every once in a while have to sit with me in a conference room, and we're all going to share some guacamole, and it works. Okay. So I always give everybody the tip of, to the extent you can, if maybe not every board meeting, but like, every once in a while, just get some chips and salsa and some snacks or whatever for people, and you'll be surprised what happens. Sometimes I have these question marks whenever this is an active webinar, but I'll skip over people chiming in with other reasons. This is called nirvana. And if you really Google the concept of nirvana, you will find a lot of different explanations to it. But the basic premise of this, guys, is it means indifferent. It means not giving anything. So why is this pyramid here? It really is a psychological principle that basically stands for the premise that, the dysfunctionality of a board or a company or a team or whatever it is that you want to think of, it is like a pyramid. It starts with the foundation of the lack of trust, and then it's a domino effect. And the higher you get, it's not that the less important the thing is, it's more like it's harder to even get to it. I'm going to explain that in a second. If we actually transfer that pyramid and break it down, you'll see that a lot of writers will talk about these 5 dysfunctions of a board or 5 dysfunctions of a team that end up leading to that state of being indifferent or not caring. So the fact that we talked initially about how boards presumptively don't work, it's good to now inspect, well, what are these 5 aspects that together, when they happen even independently or together, they end up leading to the state of being indifferent, not caring, and not being and being so excited to just get out of the board. And so the 5 levels, as you can see, the foundation of everything, including relationships, teams, whatever it may be, is trust. And so one of the dysfunctions, these are called the 5 dysfunctions of the team. One of the dysfunctions is the absence of trust. So whenever you have absence of trust on the board, which we're going to talk a little bit about, that is the initial level or the foundation that ends up having a negative domino effect to everything else. The second one is fear of conflict. That is actually a dysfunction. When I say this, a lot of people raise their hands and say, wait a minute, isn't that a good thing to avoid conflict? No, not really. If you are afraid of a conflict, then chances are you're not going to speak up about an important opinion that you have because you want to avoid a conflict. So conflict itself, sure, there's a negative connotation associated with it. But if you have fear of conflict, then chances are you're going to be a follower. You're going to be a person that doesn't really speak up, and you're going to be a person that becomes very discontent very quickly because you just don't want to create conflict. A lot of people who are afraid of conflict, they spin it in a positive light and they call themselves peacemakers. I'm a peacemaker. That's why I don't want to talk about this. But really what that means is you're actually creating chaos by tucking everything under the rug. And eventually that is going to create a mountain of problems because you can't tuck that many problems under the rug. So people who are afraid of conflict, unfortunately, end up creating a huge dysfunction on the team. One of my favorite parts of this lesson is actually the tip that I give about getting over the fear of conflict. And I can't tell you how many of my managers have emailed me or called me and they said, I recommended this to my board. They lost it when I first recommended it to them, but then they tried it and now it's awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tip later. The third dysfunction is called a lack of commitment. So obviously, I see this a lot with my millennials. And side note, because I am technically a millennial, I get to make fun of millennials. Okay, so don't be offended at that. It's almost like, when we can, like how a woman can pick on women and a millennial can pick on millennials and that kind of stuff. I get to do it. So if I have any millennials here who are offended, I'm one of you. Don't be upset. But a lack of commitment tends to happen a lot with my millennials, and it's probably because of the millennials' need for immediate gratification. And millennials don't really have enough patience. We want to change the world by like 5 o'clock because after that we have happy hour. So we don't really want to put in a lot more time to something that takes several months to be realized. And when you join a board, you find that just getting a new landscaper on could sometimes take 3 or 4 months. And so that ends up making my millennials lose a lot of patience. And they end up not being committed, but then they have to stay on the board, or it's cool to stay on the board because now I'm like the vice president of whatever it is that I'm the vice president of, right? So they end up staying on the board, but be without the commitment. It ends up causing problems because it's one less person who's doing work. The fourth dysfunction is called avoidance of accountability. I find this with my people who are always like, yeah, I'll get that done tonight. No problem. They speak up so much and so quickly about I'll get that done tonight, or sure, yeah, in fact, I'll take it a step further. I'll do this other stuff by next time. They take on so much. And because they take on so much, they don't have a chance to do it. And so they end up promising more next time because they feel bad that they didn't do the initial task in the first place. So they come back and say, hey, I didn't get to do this, but only because I wanted to make it so great. And that's why I'm still working on it, because I also want to make it like this patent pending methodology of hiring a new janitorial system, or team in our community. That's why I'm not done with it yet. So they end up promising more and more, and then they drown in having a lot of tasks and nobody is holding them accountable because they're always charming with over promising more next time they come. So I find my over promisers suffering from this dysfunction, which is called the avoiding accountability. And then lastly, this is at the tip of the pyramid. I don't think it is by any means the least important. In fact, I think it's the most important. But it's at the tip of the pyramid because it takes a lot to even know what your focus is or what your purpose is in a community. And so it's the hardest to get to, but it's also the one that will destroy the pyramid if you just remove that tip. You no longer have a pyramid. You just have, whatever shape that would be. The inattention to results, I prefer to rename that. I have actually renamed it in lessons before, but the only reason I keep the wording here is because the articles that are published about dysfunctions use these terms, and I haven't published anything yet, so I don't feel like I could change them. But the inattention to results is really, what that really means is not knowing the purpose for why you are on the board, or not knowing the purpose of the community. That's not having a clear vision of why are we even here, okay? That's basically the why. I'm sure all of us have seen Instagram memes and articles and all sorts of things about know your why and know your purpose. When you don't know your why and your purpose in an organization, you are not paying attention to the results. When you have that in a board, and I'm going to explain this more once we get to that portion. When you have that in a board, what that means is everyone is not paying attention to the goal for why they're on the board and working backwards from there. Because if everybody is doing that, you will not have this dysfunction. Let me explain a little bit further, and then we're going to do an exercise. What I mean by this, guys, is this. I like to give an example. Once upon a time, I had the pleasure of having my best friend be my partner in the practice of law. She is the worst at technology. She cannot work a computer to save her life. And she's a millennial. I am great at technology. I'm the one that sits in front of my computer and drafts Excel formulas, just from my head. And people are like, why? Well, how do you know that? I love technology. I have the latest and greatest software and all sorts of things. And she cannot do it to save her life. She and I did several jury trials together. And when we did jury trials, the first couple, they would frustrate me because she would get up on closing and she'd be like, Deanna, can you do this whole thing that I'm supposed to do with the TV to make the exhibit come up and stuff? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing other stuff. Can't you figure it out? You're like 30 years old. You're supposed to know this stuff, And I would get frustrated. And then sometimes she would get frustrated at me for getting too excited about technology. Oh, we should have this virtual robot being built in front of the jury to explain to them what happened in our case. And she'd be like, just get over it. So then we actually had a heart-to-heart. And what we talked about was, wait a minute. We are being irritated with each other because of the process of getting to the goal, which is serving our client, making sure that our client wins. But we're focusing too much on the process and what's happening over here. And we're not remembering what the result is and what the goal is. If we both paid attention to the result and just worked backwards from there, and we keep our eye on that prize, which is the result is I want to win this trial, and the result is the best interest of the client, then we will both do a better job at keeping all of the internal disputes we have between each other behind the scenes, because we both want everybody to see the result that we have our eyes on. And let's embrace each other's quirks and annoying things that we have, like not knowing how to run technology. I still think that's extremely annoying, but whatever. So we started to do that, and guys, we were unstoppable. We were winning every single case because every time we had an internal dispute, we would be like, you know what? Let's not let everybody else see that we're frustrated at this thing that's happening. Let's keep emphasizing that result and work backwards from there, and everybody else will see the result that we're trying to see by osmosis, you know, and then we will focus on that result and we'll get there. Somehow we'll get there because both of us, that's where we're looking. It's almost like when you go take ski lessons, the instructor will always tell you, don't look at your feet, look at where you're going, and somehow your body will take you there. So I tell my boards, the attention to results or the inattention to results is one of the most exciting dysfunctions to focus on, because whenever you're fighting, whenever you are arguing, if you as a property manager are there and you're hearing a board member say, I don't understand why we need to, let's say, build a fence around the property. And let's say that costs $100,000. I don't understand why we need to build a fence around the property. You know, that's $100,000 and we should keep that money. And then the other one is like, you only don't understand because you don't have kids. And, you know, I don't want my kids running outside of the plate, whatever. I don't know. I'm just coming up with an argument. A lot of times you as a manager may sit there and may be like, oh my gosh, this is insane. But if you can, I'm not saying be like, hey guys, you guys are doing this fifth dysfunction. Don't do that. But just like be like, hey guys, the goal here, like we talked about when we initiated this project, the goal here was to increase security in the community. That's the goal that we identified. And so if the goal is to increase security in the community, let's work backwards from there. That is the why in this project. So how do we work backwards from there? All of these arguments that we're having should effectuate that goal. Is saving money something that effectuates that goal? No. Is making sure that kids are not running outside of the perimeter? Partly. Is making sure that, you know, maybe people are not trespassing? Yes. But this is the goal. So let's work backwards from there. We've all agreed that this is the goal. So because, you know, the results doesn't have to just be, why are you on the board? What's your purpose in life? The results could be the big picture stuff, like I'm on the board because I want to make my community better. But the results could also be project by project. So if in that project, the result that you wanted to achieve is increased security in the community, then anytime your board members are fighting about the process, stop and remind them of the result and of the why, and have them work backwards from there, and you'll see how they'll come around. So that's what that fifth dysfunction is. Now, I know that we're still speaking very vague concepts right now. So I'm going to apply these concepts in an example that I think will really tie nicely. But the example that we're going to do, Shauna and Laura, is it okay that if I have everyone do an exercise, even if they're not able to be interactive with us, perhaps I can ask them to do something and just have them write it down in their notepads or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's something you want them to chat in, they have the option to chat in too, and you can see that.
Excellent. So I would like that actually. But let me then put the exercise up. So actually, while I put the exercise up, if everybody could make sure that you have a pen and paper. Okay, so everybody get a pen and paper. And if you don't mind, on your pen and paper, just go ahead and number it 1 through 15. So, but don't, you know, just vertically 1 through 15. I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Okay, and so if you If you went ahead and numbered it, 1 through 15. Now, I'm going to share a slide. And in that slide, I struggle with this. Here we go. All right. So, but actually, before I share a slide, now that you've numbered your papers, I want everyone to think of a community that you manage. And for my portfolio managers, and I'm sorry, does Castle do both portfolio and on-site? I think you guys do, right? So some of your CAMs are fully on-site, and then others have more than one property. Is that correct?
Most are on site dedicated. We do have a handful of managers who do portfolio for specific scenarios, but we don't have, we literally have like a handful of portfolio managers.
Okay, all right. So mostly on site, is that fair?
Yeah, mostly, most of our managers have one community that they
Have one
manage.
community. Okay. Well, maybe that's why they love working for Castle. And then is it fair to assume that you guys manage both condominiums and townhomes and pretty much everything? You're not just like,
Yep.
okay, great.
Yep.
So I'll just make sure then it's generalized. So if each of my managers, and for those of you who are not managers on the webinar, if you're, business development, whatever it may be, maybe think of your office team or your, any team that you belong to, if you can't think of a community, anything that has a board, maybe even your job.
A lot of people on here are actually board members as well. So.
Oh, that's excellent. I love that. So if you're a board member, then please, you should have warned me about that before I said boards presumptively don't work.
Hey, it's the truth though,
I'm kidding. But I explained why they don't work, and now we're going to figure out a way to make them work. So for my board members who are on here, please then think of your community. In this example, you're going to use your community to answer these questions. For my managers, obviously also think of your community, but what might be fun is, let's say you've been a manager for 10 years and you've managed 5 or 6 different properties. Maybe think of the community that had a board that's kind of in between, not the board that was like perfect and amazing and did everything wonderfully, and not the board that almost killed each other at every meeting, maybe one in between. Okay. And then for those of you who are neither managing a current property or a board member, think of anything that has a board, maybe your company that you currently work at or anything like that. So we're going to do this exercise with only that board in mind. When you're answering these questions, do not deviate. Do not say, well, that one board did this and that one board did this. You're only going to think of this one board. And if you are a board member, really be honest with yourself and how you're answering this. And I will share this with you if you wish after the fact. Most of the board members that attend this class with me end up asking me for a hard copy of this exercise because they want to do it with their boards. So don't worry, I'm happy to share this with you after the fact. All right, so on your piece of paper that you numbered 1 through 15, what I would like for you to do is, everybody sees the screen correctly, right, Shauna and Laura?
Yes.
Okay. What I'd like for you to do is read each of these statements, and please go ahead and number next to it, just like it shows here. If the answer is rarely, put a 1. If the answer is sometimes, put a 2. And if the answer is usually or oftentimes, then put a 3. Do that to 1 through 15. I'll give you, about 4 or 5 minutes to get that done. Okay. So, usually when we do this in person, I do like a handout, and it makes the numbering of your own piece of paper a little less tedious, so forgive me for that. But what I would like for you to do next is turn your paper over, or maybe if you have some room on the side or underneath or something like that. All right. Write dysfunction 1. Just write that, dysfunction 1 or D1 or whatever. And then write, like you're gonna go, in fact, I'll just kind of show you. Here we go. So just write dysfunction number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like that. Okay. And then what I need you to do is a little bit of math. It's not a lot, guys. At most, you're adding 3 plus 3 plus 3. So it's not going to be hard. But I need for under dysfunction number 1, add your scores for statements 4, 6, and 12. So going back, if you put a 1 next to 4, and if you put a 1 next to 6, and a 3 next to 12, then here you're just going to write 5. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do that for all of the dysfunctions. Go ahead and add your scores of the statements under each of these and write a total just like that. Okay, I think that should be enough time to do a little bit of math. And so now we're going to reveal some results. And after we reveal some results, what I would really like to do is if we can have folks being able to chat and maybe volunteer to, are they able to speak if they end up volunteering or just chat?
No, since we
That's
have it
fine.
set up as a webinar, they don't
Okay.
have the ability to actually
That's fine.
speak. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. Maybe what we'll do is if they could just, chat whatever thoughts you may have after I put in the next slide. So in thinking about your community, as you can see, this exercise is designed to do what's called isolating the problem, right? Like if you go to the doctor and you say, oh, I'm just hurting everywhere, and they start asking you questions, and then they might say, that's probably because you have a herniated disc and that's causing you, this and this and this and that, and that explains your headaches, that explains this. But they are able to ask all of the right questions to isolate the problem. So when you're thinking about your board and you answered all those questions, and now that you've added it up, depending on your totals, if for a particular dysfunction, if you scored an 8 or a 9, then that's an indication that the dysfunction is probably not a problem for your board. So in other words, if for absence of trust, you have an 8 or 9 down here, then it probably means that trust is just not an issue with your board. You guys tend to trust each other. But if you scored a 1 or a 2, I guess the lowest you could score is a 3. If you scored a 3 or 5, then this dysfunction is a problem and it needs to be addressed immediately. And I promise you, if it is not addressed, things are going to get worse. It's not something that you can just say, maybe not. If you're at a 6 or a 7, then the dysfunction could be a problem, not could not be a problem. Why? Because the beginning of this class, we talked about how boards are presumptively not working. And so if you're getting up to a 6 or a 7 in a particular dysfunction, that means when you started out in debt anyway, because naturally you have people from different walks of life and different experiences, you've got to attend to this thing. This isn't just something that started to breed. And so I'm interested if anybody is able to send us a chat in seeing maybe your thoughts about, wow, this is, this was able to tell me that, I scored, my board scored pretty low in lack of commitment and a fear of conflict. And that's actually very true, because nobody wants to argue, so everyone's a follower, and there's only one person who's loud and leading all the decisions, and nobody seems to be committed. So if you want to share what your thoughts are in doing this exercise, you can go ahead and we can talk about it. Otherwise, we'll just continue going, and I can tell you a little bit more about how this may be implemented with your boards. Do we know if we have any general counsel on this webinar? Like, we don't think
Okay.
so.
So. Not that I remember seeing on the registration sheet.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. And if anybody does want to chat in, you can just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and just feel free to use that to chat in.
Great. And so the reason I ask about general counsel is what I normally recommend next is something that ends up generating questions, which is, wait, I thought all of our board meetings have to be closed or open to the whole community. If we do this exercise, do we have to like disclose it? How can we be honest? And it becomes a difficult conversation. And so what I always say is, you can ask your general counsel if this is the type of exercise that will have to be in an open meeting. And the reason I say that is, I am an attorney. I do practice in this industry. I'm obviously not your general counsel, so I won't know, how to advise you in that regard. But I am one of the attorneys who believe that unless you are making decisions on behalf of the community, or if there's some decision making or anything like that, I am not as afraid of board members getting together and being so worried about the concept of having a quorum. There are some board members that I've heard of who were actually friends before they all made the board, and they stopped going to dinner with each other because they're so worried about establishing a quorum. I don't think that was the purpose of the legislation behind the concept of sharing everything with the community. So if you're not making community decisions and you're getting together to genuinely try and work together to figure out how to make your board more functional, I don't think that is a problem, but I highly recommend you ask your general counsel about the methodology of how to implement that. The reason I mention this is this. I recommend that if you feel like you have a board that could use some work, or maybe we could use isolating the problems. Like, is trust an issue for us? Is it that people are not accountable to the things that they volunteer to do? Or is it that we don't want to have a healthy debate or healthy conflict? What is the issue? How do we address it? Then I highly recommend you take this exercise and you have the entire board fill it out separately. I don't think you should fill it out together, because if you fill it out together, then Linda, who may be a lot more vocal, is going to be like, that's not true. Every time we get together, we absolutely make decisions. That's not a sometimes, that's a rarely, or vice versa, or whatever. And then Bill, who wants to avoid conflict, might be like, all right, fine, that's true. And then you're going to get the worst results ever. So I highly recommend that you actually do this. Each person does this separately. And if it means that you sit together and you do it, great. And then you could share the results. If it means you do it separately and then you just chat about it, maybe when you see each other around your community, then that's fine too. That might alleviate any concerns about doing it in front of people or something like that. But I have had board members actually do this, and then they tell me that it was so interesting that one person thought the entire board had no problem with trust, and they all trusted each other wholeheartedly. And then another thought that that was their biggest dysfunction. I mean, what a great discovery to make, because that means you guys are not even on the same page about what the problem is. And let's actually take it to something that I think all of us can relate to, you know, relationships, right? How many times have we seen movies where like a couple is arguing and then the other is like, that's not even what this is about, right? And so when we have two board members, one of whom thinks the biggest issue on our board is that there's just no trust, and the other's like, I thought we trusted each other fully, but I thought the biggest issue is we're just not on the same page about why we are doing this thing with the board in the first place. Then imagine the dialogue that stems from that. Because what that means is, by doing this exercise, and here's the best part about doing this exercise, and I know that sometimes people are like, that's so cheesy, I don't want to do it. I promise you, here's why it's great to do something like this. You avoid having to have someone be like, hey, Linda, you're kind of hogging the conversation here, and you need to chill because everyone is having to agree with you, because if they don't, they fear incurring your wrath. Like, you, who wants to have that conversation with Linda, right? And I'm so sorry if anybody here's name is Linda. I just chose that name for no reason. But who wants to actually say that? But if you end up actually having an exercise, not even a person, it's like a random generated exercise that some lawyer once handed you, say to you that, hey, the rest of the board has a fear of conflict, but Linda is the only one who thinks that dysfunction is a perfect thing and there's not a problem there, then it's probably because the rest of the board is like, let's just say yes to what this woman is suggesting. And then that will generate a dialogue. It might generate an honest dialogue. It might even make that person be like, why is it that you guys think there's a trust issue with the board? Let's talk about that. The dialogues that will be generated from this will be mind-blowingly productive. If, on the other hand, you end up having a scenario where everybody agrees, like everyone is like, we don't have any problems with our attention to results, and we don't have any problems with trust, and we don't have any problems with accountability, but we just don't have commitment. People just seem to be, like maybe missing every other meeting, or missing 3 out of 4 meetings, or not really responding to the emails, but they like being on the board. Then the dialogue that will stem from that is excellent, because you will have isolated the problem. And the great thing that you will arm your manager with, if you do an exercise like this, is your manager, because trust me, your managers want more than anything to make the board meeting smoother, right? Your manager will then be like, hey guys, what can I do to help you solve this problem? Do you want me to bring this up maybe every quarter and just be like, how do we feel about the dysfunction that we identified a few months ago when it comes to commitment? Do you want me to maybe make it more exciting to generate commitment from the board, perhaps by, I don't know, whatever it may be, you guys get creative with that. I don't have all of the answers, but it'll allow your manager to then, instead of having to be like, you guys are not committed. And now everybody's mad at the manager for really just stating the truth as an outsider. It'll allow your manager to be like, thank you, exercise, for identifying what I've been trying to say for so long. How can I help you guys fix this? Right? But
100%.
even for you guys as board members, it sounds like we have a lot of board members here. I am certain that one of you is probably like, I love being on the board. I love serving my community. I love bringing my experience. But there's this one board member that is just the naysayer. They just say no to everything. And we don't know how to bring that person along. And I don't really want to argue with that person because she coaches my, son's basketball team. Because remember, we're all neighbors, right? This makes it even harder. It's not a company. This will allow you to really tackle these issues and have dialogues and get ahead of them. Now, I know I don't have a lot of time left. I probably only have a couple of minutes. So what I would like to close with is another exercise that I think you guys can do in your boards that is incredibly valuable. And that's an exercise that tackles the dysfunction called a fear of conflict. The fear of conflict is probably the most common dysfunction because the reality is there's always, with all due respect to my lawyers who are also board members, there's always a lawyer on the board. And the lawyers on the board are always the ones who are like, let me show you how it's done. Let me tell you what we really need to vote on here. Or in the alternative, there's always an engineer on the board. And the engineer is always like, that's just settling. I know this because I'm an engineer. We don't need to actually, bring a professional that gives us a formal opinion since we have a fiduciary duty and things might come back and haunt us in a few years if that settling continues to crap. There's always an engineer, there's always a lawyer, or there's always a professional that really wants to insert their experience a little too much. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to bring your experience. It's incredible when we have accountants on the board because then they could look at the reserve study and actually understand it because most people don't. It's incredible to have doctors, lawyers, whoever, a coffee shop millionaire, whatever you want to call it on the board, bring your experiences. But what ends up happening is anytime you are trying to make a decision relating to someone's experience on that board, it naturally happens that everybody else is like, I'm not even going to argue about this. This person is going to lead the show when it comes to this issue. So we're just going to say sure or yes or whatever, because there's that fear of conflict. So what I recommend to tackle this is whenever you have a meeting that is not perhaps an open board meeting with agenda items, maybe you're even just conversing at a pool party, I don't know. Whenever you are not afraid of the creation of a quorum, okay? Force each person to actually identify something that could be worked on the board. Not a way to create more conflict. Anything that could be worked on the board. Even if it goes to a different dysfunction, even if it falls under the umbrellas of different dysfunctions. Here's why. Because if you force someone to identify a thing that can be worked on, even if that thing has to do with other dysfunctions, it all of a sudden gives permission to everyone to identify something instead of being like, I don't have anything. Everything's fine. Everything is hunky-dory from where I'm standing. When in reality, they have a couple of issues in here, or they're thinking of a couple of issues. It forces them to exercise the concept of speaking up about an issue, no matter what that issue is. And there's always room to identify something that can be worked on, because nobody's going to say, I think everything is perfect. I promise you, no one's going to say that. If you say, yeah, but unfortunately, we have to identify one thing that could be worked on, just come up with something. Then whatever they come up with, even if it's minuscule, it allows everyone to exercise the concept of actually speaking up about something. And then next time when Linda's like, obviously we're all going to vote this way, perhaps that person will have exercised the concept of speaking up a couple of times and will start to be like, yeah, but what about this? And so in my team, in my law firm, when we get together, I force everyone, even if everything seems to be incredible, I force everyone to give me one thing that went wrong this week. That went wrong. And it's not because I want to focus on the negative. It's because I really want everyone to feel empowered to speak up when they happen to be more of an introvert, when they happen to always be a little bit more of a follower. And it forces the person that's always speaking up to have to zip for a second and let everybody else get a word in. So that's another exercise that you can do. I know that I'm out of time. I love teaching this class so much. I think it's incredibly valuable for you to be proactive and get ahead of these issues and start to do some things outside the box with your board. And believe it or not, it will be extremely valuable.
Yeah, well, thank you, Deanna. And we did have somebody ask, and I know you touched on this a little bit, but they said, you know, are these dialogues supposed to happen in an open board meeting, which probably not the best place for the conversations, but I know you have to be careful, like you said, with the quorum and the situation, but I think you can get creative and somehow being able to have a conversation like offline, you know, about it.
I agree. I mean, I am not, you know, the intent of the law is not to make us miserable in our lives. You know, the intent of the legislation that says, oh, the sunshine laws and open records and that kind of stuff is not to prohibit board members who are trying to figure out the best way to work together and elevate each other. So it's a great question. I want to answer it, but I promise you the best way to tackle that is with your general counsel. Now, remember, general counsel may be conservative and may say, yeah, I don't know how you could do this. It should be an open meeting. Just talk about it when you guys are having your pool party and just make people do it separately without even being together and just address the results. It might make it less formal that way.
Yeah. And then I do know this morning, I emailed out, I think it was actually that little assessment to anybody who had registered this, who was already registered this morning. So I did send that out, but Laura and I will send out emails to everybody who registered, because I do notice not as many people are on that actually registered. So anybody who registered, we will send an email out before the end of the week that'll have a recording of this presentation, a link to a recording, and then we will resend the assessment again that Deanna had. Annika actually gave it to me this morning, Deanna. So we have that, and then is the evaluation form, and then the evaluation form. Oh no, that's your evaluation form. Also, I'm going to send, if you didn't get it already, an evaluation form that Deanna would love your feedback on this presentation as well. Somebody did ask though, is there a way to read the results? Like once, is there anything separate on what they need as far as reading? I think it's just there's a little synopsis, right, on the scoring page.
Yeah, so so I will just put that up again. It's right here. And if you end up, whoops, yeah. But if you have that assessment page, the results should be on the flip side of that page. If you don't have it, Shauna, just let me know. We'll make sure you get
I have it. And I did, some people probably already have it because I did email it out this morning to anybody who had registered. But we will, everybody who registered, whether you're on now or they weren't able to make it, Laura and I will send out emails before the end of the week that we'll have that again, as well as the recording to this. Right. And then your information as well, Deanna. We'll include your information in case anybody wants to reach out to you about the firm or anything of that nature as well.
And Shauna and Laura, one thing I just want to close with this. There are 2 bills right now in the legislature that are extremely scary for homeowners and for board members. I'm hoping we are doing everything we can as a law firm to work with lobbyists to try to defeat these bills. They are very homeowner unfriendly. And they're House Bill 86 and Senate Bill 360. I have a complete class about legal updates and all these types of things. And usually I like to teach the class prior to distributing that kind of material. But because these things are very important, I'm happy to distribute that to anybody that wants it as well. You know, a lot of the classes that I do that contain legal updates are usually very busy and question and answer heavy. So I'm happy to just give that to you if you want to share it with people as well, considering how important it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any scheduled legal updates coming up that are webinar based or local or?
I'm happy to do one for Castle if you want. I do have a couple scheduled. I know they're both full, but I mean, considering how much people want to learn the legal updates, I'm working with Annika to schedule a couple more, but if you guys want me to do one just for you, I'm happy to do that as well. We can just get together with Annika and we'll schedule one next month or something. And it'll be a good legal update for everything that's happened recently.
Okay, fantastic. And I put the information on the screen for both us and Deanna. And then, like I said, we will email out Deanna's information as well, her contact and the firm information, as well as Laura and I's information if you guys should need anything or have any other questions. Otherwise, thank you. Thank you, Deanna, for your time. This was really insightful, and I think some boards are going to have fun with that assessment and some managers. So we appreciate it and appreciate your time today.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy this beautiful weather.